The storm raged through the whispering pines like an angry beast, its claws of wind tearing at everything in sight. Thunder rolled across the sky with such violence that even the ancient oaks trembled beneath its power. Elara pressed her worn cloak tighter against her body as she hurried along the muddy forest path, her bare feet splashing through puddles of icy rainwater that seemed to multiply with every step. The cold bit through her thin clothing like needles of ice, but she pressed on with the stubborn determination that had kept her alive through countless hardships. Being the lowest-ranking wolf in the Silver Moon pack meant she was always the one sent out during dangerous weather to gather herbs and supplies that others deemed too risky to collect. The pack's healers needed moonflower petals and silver root for their medicines, and storms often made these rare plants more potent. Of course, they couldn't be bothered to risk their own precious lives for such tasks. That's what omegas were. For, after all, expendable, replaceable, invisible until needed. But Elara didn't mind the solitude anymore. She had learned to find peace in it. In fact, she preferred it to the suffocating atmosphere of the pack house where every breath felt like swallowing poison. Out here, away from the judgmental stares and whispered insults of her packmates, she could simply exist without apology. No one expected anything from an omega except to stay quiet, stay invisible, and serve without question. Yet deep in her heart, buried beneath layers of learned silence and practiced submission, she carried a flame that refused to be extinguished, a burning desire to prove that even the smallest, weakest wolf could make a difference in this harsh world. Her mother had planted that flame before the sickness took her when Elara was barely 10. "Remember, my little moon," she had whispered with her dying breath. "The gentlest rain can carve the deepest valleys. Never forget your worth, no matter what they tell you." Those words had sustained Elara through beatings, through hunger, through nights when she wondered if it would be easier to simply disappear into the forest and never return. The lightning illuminated the forest in stark, brilliant flashes of white, turning the familiar woodland into an alien landscape of dancing shadows and ethereal light. It was during one of these brilliant, otherworldly moments that she saw it. A small, dark shape huddled beneath a massive fallen log, barely moving, soaked to the bone and trembling with what she first assumed was cold. But as she drew closer, her enhanced omega senses, heightened by years of hypervigilance, immediately picked up the metallic scent of blood mixed with something else, fear, pure, primal terror from a creature too young to understand why it was suffering. Without hesitation, she dropped her woven gathering basket, herbs scattering into the mud without a second thought. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she rushed toward the tiny creature, her healer's instincts overriding every self-preservation mechanism her harsh life had taught her. She had always been drawn to wounded things, perhaps because she recognized in them a reflection of her own broken spirit. What she found beneath that log made her heart clench with a pain so sharp it stole her breath away. A wolf pup, no more than a few weeks old, lay dying in the mud and decomposing leaves. Its tiny body was racked with shivers that had nothing to do with the cold. The pup's silver-touched black fur was matted with blood from several deep, precise gashes across its tiny flanks, wounds that spoke of deliberate cruelty rather than accident or natural predation. Its breathing was so shallow she could barely detect the rise and fall of its minuscule chest. But it was the eyes that truly captured her when they flickered open. Struggling to focus on her face, they were the most extraordinary shade of silver she had ever seen, not the dull silver of ordinary metal, but something far more precious and otherworldly, like liquid moonlight captured in living form, like starshine given substance, like the color of hope itself. Even in its weakened state, there was something profound in that gaze, something that spoke to the very depths of her soul. "Oh, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion as she knelt in the cold mud without caring about her. "Only decent dress. What monster could have done this to you?" The pup whimpered softly, a sound so heartbreaking that tears immediately sprang to Elara's eyes and began streaming down her cheeks, mixing with the rainwater. She knew the logical thing would be to report the injured pup to the pack's healers. They had the proper facilities, the expensive medicines, the expertise that she lacked. But she also knew with bitter certainty that they would likely refuse to waste precious resources on a creature that might not even belong to their territory. Omegas learned early in life that mercy was a luxury they couldn't afford to expect from others. The pack had made their priorities crystal clear when they had refused to treat her own infected wound last winter, leaving her to heal herself with forest remedies and sheer stubborn will. If they wouldn't help one of their own pack members, what hope did a lost pup have? But Elara had never been good at following the logical path when her heart was involved. It was simultaneously her greatest weakness and her most defining strength. Gently, so very gently that she barely disturbed the air around the tiny creature, she scooped the pup into her arms. It felt impossibly fragile, like holding a bundle of wet autumn leaves that might crumble at the slightest pressure. She wrapped it carefully in her cloak, the warmest thing she owned, and felt its weak but steady heartbeat against her chest. That tiny rhythm gave her hope. As long as there was a heartbeat, there was a chance. As she began the treacherous journey back to her small cottage, on the very outskirts of pack territory, she found herself speaking softly to the pup, hoping her voice might provide some small comfort in its pain. "You're going to be all right," she murmured, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was trying to convince the pup or herself. "I'll take care of you, I promise on my mother's memory. I won't let you die alone." The cottage that awaited them was humble, barely more than a single room with a small stone fireplace and the most basic necessities. But it was warm and dry, and most importantly, it was safe. Here, she answered to no one. Elara quickly built up the fire until flames danced high and bright, then created a makeshift bed from her softest blankets near the hearth, where the warmth would be strongest. Working by firelight, she cleaned the pup's wounds with the careful precision of someone who had learned healing through necessity rather than formal training. She used the knowledge she had absorbed from observing the pack's medicine wolves from afar, supplemented by the folk remedies her mother had taught her and the techniques she had developed through treating her own injuries over the years. As she worked, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. These weren't random wounds from a fall or an animal attack. They were too precise, too deliberately placed. Someone had hurt this innocent creature intentionally, methodically. The realization filled her with a cold rage she rarely allowed herself to feel, a fury that burned white-hot in her chest. "Who could do such a thing?" she whispered, applying a healing salve she had made from forest herbs. "You're just a baby. You've never hurt anyone." Throughout that long, anxious night, she kept vigil beside the pup like a guardian angel made of determination and love. She checked its breathing every few minutes, offered it drops of water and warm milk whenever it seemed strong enough to swallow. She sang soft lullabies her own mother had once sung to her, before the sickness stole her away and left Elara alone in a world that had no place for gentle hearts. As dawn approached, painting the sky in brilliant shades of rose and burnished gold, something miraculous happened. The pup managed to lift its tiny head and look directly at her with those remarkable silver eyes, now bright with returning life. "That's it, little warrior." Elara smiled through tears of pure relief. "You're going to make it." She had no way of knowing that her simple act of compassion had set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the supernatural world. The pup she had saved was no ordinary wolf. Those silver eyes marked him as royalty, as something far more precious and dangerous than she could possibly imagine. And as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, casting long shadows through the peaceful forest, a group of massive wolves was already following the scent trail that would lead them directly to her door. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to discover what happens when the Alpha King's elite guard arrives at Elara's cottage. Will her act of kindness lead to her salvation or seal her doom? The next chapter will leave you breathless. Hit that subscribe button now and join our community for more incredible fantasy stories that will captivate your heart and soul. The morning sun had barely kissed the treetops when the thunderous sound of approaching paws shattered the peaceful silence surrounding Elara's cottage. She had been gently feeding the wolf pup drops of warm honey water when the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate with an ominous rhythm that made her blood turn to ice in her veins. The sound was unlike anything she had ever experienced. A coordinated march that spoke of military precision and overwhelming power. The little pup, in her arms, suddenly went rigid, its silver eyes widening with what looked remarkably like recognition mixed with terror. A soft whimper escaped its tiny throat, and Elara felt her heart begin to race with premonition. Whatever was coming, the pup knew exactly what it meant, and that knowledge filled the small creature with dread. Through her small window, Elara watched in growing horror as massive shapes began to emerge from between the ancient trees. These weren't ordinary wolves. Each one stood nearly as tall as a horse, their muscular frames rippling with supernatural strength beneath coats that gleamed like polished obsidian in the morning light. Their eyes burned with an otherworldly intelligence that spoke of centuries, of battle experience and unwavering loyalty to something far greater than themselves. At their head strode a wolf so enormous that Elara's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. His coat was the color of midnight storms, shot through with silver streaks that caught the light like lightning frozen in time. Scars crisscrossed his massive frame, each one a testament to battles fought and won in service to his king. When his golden eyes fixed on her cottage, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical force pressing against her chest. This was Commander Thane, though Elara didn't know his name yet. What she did know, with bone-deep certainty, was that she was looking at death incarnate, the kind of wolf who could tear apart armies without breaking stride, whose very presence commanded absolute obedience from every creature within miles. Omega, his voice rolled across the clearing like distant thunder, rich with authority and barely contained violence. Bring forth what you have taken. Elara's legs trembled so violently she could barely remain standing. Every instinct screamed at her to drop to her knees in submission, to beg forgiveness for whatever crime she had unknowingly committed. But the tiny weight in her arms reminded her of something more important than her own fear. The pup was depending on her, and she had made a promise. Promises were sacred things, especially to someone who had been betrayed by so many others. I don't understand, she called back, amazed that her voice remained steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. I haven't taken anything. I found an injured pup and gave it shelter. Nothing more. The commander's laugh was like the growl of an earthquake preparing to swallow the world. Injured pup. His golden eyes blazed with something between amusement and barely restrained fury. You foolish little Omega, do you have any idea what you've done? Behind him, the other members of the guard began to spread out in a perfect tactical formation, surrounding her cottage with the smooth efficiency of wolves who had performed this maneuver countless times before. Each one was a living weapon, bred and trained for war. Their eyes never left her small home, and she could practically feel their readiness to strike at the slightest provocation. Elara clutched the pup closer to her chest, her protective instincts overriding her terror. He was dying, she said, lifting her chin with a courage she didn't know she possessed. He was bleeding and alone in the storm. What kind of monster would I be if I had left him there to suffer? Monster. Commander Thane's voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his earlier roar. You speak of monsters while holding the crown prince of the northern realms in your arms. The words hit Elara like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her legs go weak. Crown Prince, the tiny, injured creature she had been nursing back to health, was royalty. Not just any royalty, but the heir to the most powerful supernatural kingdom in existence. The realization made her head spin with the implications. That's impossible, she whispered, looking down at the small bundle in her arms. The pup gazed back at her with those extraordinary silver eyes, and suddenly she understood. The otherworldly intelligence, the sense of ancient nobility, the precise nature of his injuries. Someone had tried to kill the crown prince, and she had unknowingly saved him. Prince Adrian has been missing for 3 days, Commander Thane continued, his voice carrying the weight of barely controlled anguish. 3 days during which the entire kingdom has been turned upside down searching for him. 3 days during which his father, Alpha King Maximilian, has been slowly losing his mind with grief and rage. The guard began to close in, their massive forms blotting out the morning sun. Elara could smell their power, their barely leashed violence, their absolute dedication to their missing prince. She also detected something else beneath it all: fear. These legendary warriors were afraid, and that terrified her more than anything else could have. "The king has sworn a blood oath," another voice spoke from the circle of wolves. This one belonged to a female guard with silver-touched black fur and scars that told stories of 1,000 battles. "Anyone who has harmed the prince will face death by his own claws. Anyone who has hidden him will be considered an enemy of the realm." Elara felt tears beginning to stream down her face, but she refused to let go of the pup. "I didn't know," she pleaded. "I swear on my mother's grave. I had no idea who he was. I just couldn't leave him to die." Prince Adrian chose that moment to lift his tiny head and emit a soft sound, barely more than a whisper of breath, but every member of the guard heard it, and the effect was instantaneous. The aggressive postures softened slightly, ears pricking. "Forward with desperate hope, my prince," Commander Thane's voice cracked with emotion. "We've been searching everywhere for you." The pup struggled weakly in Elara's arms, trying to move toward the sound of the commander's voice, but the effort proved too much for his still healing body, and he collapsed back against her chest with a tiny whimper of exhaustion. The sound of their prince's weakness seemed to cause physical pain to every member of his guard. "He's still very weak," Elara found herself saying, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. "His wounds are healing, but he needs constant care. He can't travel far in his current condition." "Then you will come with us," Commander Thane declared, his tone brooking no argument. "The king will want to see the Omega who saved his son's life with his own eyes." Terror and confusion warred in Elara's mind. "Come with you. But I'm just an Omega. I don't belong in royal company. You belong wherever our prince needs you to be," the female guard said firmly. "And right now, he clearly needs you very much." Indeed, as if to prove her point, Prince Adrian nestled closer to Elara's warmth, his tiny paws clutching at her worn dress. The trust he showed her was absolute, the kind of bond that forms between a wounded soul and its savior. It was clear to everyone present that separating them now would cause distress to the already traumatized prince. "Gather what you need quickly," Commander Thane ordered. Though his tone had lost some of its harsh edge, "We leave within the hour. The king has waited long enough to see his son safely returned." Elara looked around her humble cottage, at the simple life she had built for herself in the shadows of pack society. Everything was about to change, and she had no idea if it would be for better or worse. All she knew was that the tiny prince in her arms was depending on her, and she would not let him down. As she began to pack her meager belongings with trembling hands, she wondered what kind of fate awaited a lowly Omega in the court of the most powerful Alpha King in the supernatural world. Would he reward her for saving his son, or would he punish her for the circumstances that had led to the prince being injured in the first place? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: her life as she knew it was over, and whatever came next would test every ounce of courage and strength she possessed. Don't miss what happens next in this incredible tale. Subscribe to our channel to see how Elara faces the Alpha King himself and discover the shocking truth behind Prince Adrian's attack. Will she find her place in the royal court, or will the dangerous secrets surrounding the prince's injury put her life in mortal peril? Hit that subscribe button and join thousands of viewers following this epic fantasy adventure. The journey to the royal stronghold took 3 grueling hours through terrain that grew progressively more magnificent and terrifying with each passing mile. Elara rode on Commander Thane's massive back, clutching Prince Adrian carefully against her chest while trying not to think about how high above the ground she was traveling. The other guards flanked them in perfect formation, their supernatural speed carrying them across rivers and up mountainsides that would have taken ordinary wolves days to traverse. The forest gradually gave way to ancient stone roads that had been carved by supernatural hands. Centuries ago, these weren't mere pathways, but works of art in themselves, inlaid with precious metals that formed intricate patterns, telling the history of the northern realm. Every few miles, they passed towering monuments dedicated to fallen heroes, their carved faces watching over the road with eternal vigilance. As they crested the final ridge, Elara's breath caught in her throat at the sight that greeted her. The Northern Realm's royal stronghold wasn't just a castle. It was a living testament to supernatural power. that had been carved directly into the face of a towering mountain. Spires of black stone twisted impossibly high into the clouds, their surfaces gleaming with veins of silver that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Massive waterfalls cascaded down the mountain's face, their mists creating rainbow bridges that shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. But it was the wolves that truly took her breath away. Hundreds of them moved with purpose throughout the strongholds, courtyards and terraces, each one radiating the kind of power that marked them as supernatural nobility. These weren't ordinary pack wolves, these were the elite of the elite, the most powerful supernatural beings in existence gathered in one place, under the rule of their alpha king. The sheer scale of it all was overwhelming. Gardens hung impossibly from cliff faces, defying gravity through ancient magic. Training grounds sprawled across multiple levels of the mountain, where warriors practiced combat techniques that sent sparks flying through the air. And everywhere, the sound of howling filled the air as news of the prince's return spread like wildfire. Through the massive community, magnificent, isn't it? Commander Thane's voice rumbled beneath her, though she detected a note of pride mixed with apprehension. Home to the Northern Pack for over 1,000 years, built by the first Alpha King who united all the supernatural clans under one banner, and soon to be your home as well, if the king wills it. The massive gates, crafted from silver-veined obsidian and standing 30 feet tall, opened at their approach without a sound. The intricate carvings covering their surface seemed to move in the shifting light, depicting scenes of great battles and legendary heroes. Guards bowed low as they passed, their eyes fixed on the small bundle in Elara's arms with expressions of relief so profound it made her heart ache. The love and loyalty these wolves felt for their young prince was palpable, a living thing that filled the very air around them. As they entered the main courtyard, word of their arrival spread like wildfire through the stronghold. Wolves appeared at windows and balconies, their voices joining in a chorus of howls that shook the very foundations of the mountain. It was a song of celebration, of joy, of thanksgiving to the moon goddess for the safe return of their beloved prince. The sound was so beautiful and so overwhelming that tears began streaming down Elara's cheeks. The courtyard itself was a masterpiece of supernatural architecture. Fountains danced with water that defied natural laws, creating sculptures that changed and evolved before her eyes. Gardens burst with flowers that bloomed in colors that shouldn't exist, their petals shimmering with inner light. And everywhere, wolves of every rank and station gathered to witness this moment of triumph. Prince Adrian stirred in her arms at the familiar sounds of home, his silver eyes opening to take in the sight of his birthright. For the first time since she had found him, he attempted a small howl of his own, a tiny sound that nonetheless carried the unmistakable authority of royal bloodline. The responding roar of approval from the assembled wolves was deafening, but it was the figure waiting at the top of the grand staircase that commanded every ounce of Elara's attention and filled her with a terror unlike anything she had ever experienced. Alpha King Maximilian stood like a living mountain of power and barely contained rage, his enormous frame radiating an aura of dominance that made every wolf in sight instinctively lower themselves in submission. He was the largest wolf Elara had ever seen, standing nearly 8 feet tall even in his human form. His hair was the color of starless midnight, shot through with silver that spoke of centuries of rule and responsibility. Scars crossed his massive frame like a roadmap of countless battles, each one a testament to his legendary prowess in combat. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as something beyond mortal comprehension. They burned with the gold of molten metal, ancient and terrible, and filled with a love so fierce it bordered on madness. When those eyes fixed on the small bundle in Elara's arms, the expression that crossed the Alpha King's face nearly stopped her heart. It was raw emotion given form, a mixture of relief, fury, and paternal devotion so intense it seemed to warp the very air around him. This was a father who had been slowly dying inside for 3 days, believing his beloved son was lost forever. Adrian. The king's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the courtyard with the force of an avalanche. The very stones seemed to tremble at the sound of his voice, and every wolf present felt the weight of his emotion like a physical force. My son. Commander Thane lowered himself to allow Elara to dismount, her legs trembling so violently she could barely stand. Every instinct screamed at her to drop to her knees in submission before this overwhelming display of supernatural authority. But the precious weight in her arms kept her upright. Prince Adrian needed her strength right now, not her fear. The Alpha King descended the staircase with fluid grace despite his massive size, each step measured and deliberate. The assembled wolves parted before him like water before the prow of a ship, none daring to meet his gaze directly. The very air seemed to thicken around him, charged with the power that had made him the undisputed ruler of the supernatural world. When he reached them, he stopped just out of arm's reach, his burning eyes fixed on his son with an intensity that made the air shimmer round them. For a moment that lasted an eternity, father and son simply looked at each other, and Elara felt like she was witnessing something sacred and profound. 3 days, he said, his voice thick with emotion that threatened to overwhelm his legendary control. 3 days I believed you were dead. 3 days I prepared for war against anyone who might have harmed you. 3 days I lived in a hell of my own making. Prince Adrian lifted his tiny head and made a soft sound, reaching one small paw toward his father. The effect on the Alpha King was instantaneous and devastating. The mountain of supernatural power and barely contained violence crumbled, replaced by a father's desperate love. Carefully, so very carefully, he extended one massive finger to touch his son's paw. The moment of contact sent a visible shockwave through the assembled crowd. Here was their mighty king, the terror of enemies and the protector of their realm, reduced to tears by the simple touch of his child's paw. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and profoundly moving. "You're safe," he whispered, and Elara could hear tears in his voice. "You're finally safe, and I swear by the moon goddess herself, nothing will ever threaten you again." Then those terrible golden eyes turned to her, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical force pressing against her chest. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the most powerful supernatural being in existence studied the humble Omega who had saved his son's life. Don't miss what happens next in this incredible fantasy saga. Subscribe to our channel now to see how the Alpha King rewards the brave Omega who saved his precious heir. Will Elara find the acceptance and family she's always dreamed of? Or will the dangerous politics of the royal court threaten everything she holds dear? Hit that subscribe button and join thousands of viewers following this epic tale of courage, compassion, and supernatural adventure. "You," the Alpha King said, his voice carrying undertones that made every wolf in the courtyard tense with anticipation. The weight of his gaze felt like standing before a force of nature, ancient and terrible and completely beyond her comprehension. "You are the one who found him." "Yes, Your Majesty," Elara managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper despite the hundreds of supernatural beings watching her every move. "I found him injured in the forest during the storm. I couldn't leave him to die, couldn't leave him to die," the king repeated, his tone unreadable but his golden eyes never leaving her face. "Do you have any idea what you've done, little Omega? Do you understand the magnitude of the gift you've given me, given all of us?" Before she could answer, he continued, his voice growing stronger and filled with an emotion she couldn't identify. "My son was taken from the royal nursery by enemies who sought to end my bloodline forever. Traitors within our own realm who believed they could seize power through the murder of an innocent child. They tortured him, tried to break his spirit before delivering the killing blow that would have plunged our world into chaos." The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Gasps echoed through the courtyard, and Elara saw more. Then one wolf's eyes flashed with murderous rage at the thought of anyone harming their beloved prince. But somehow, the king's voice softened with wonder. Through courage or luck or the will of the moon goddess herself, he escaped them, wounded, dying, lost in a storm that should have claimed his life. He crawled through the forest until fate brought him to you. The king took a step closer, and Elara had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You, a lone Omega with nothing to gain and everything to lose, chose compassion over safety. You risked your life to save a stranger, never knowing that stranger was the heir to the most powerful supernatural kingdom in existence. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day, and the memory still made Elara's heart race. Now she stood in her magnificent chambers, watching Prince Adrian play in the royal gardens below. At 8 months old, he had grown into a healthy, spirited pup whose silver eyes sparkled with mischief and intelligence that amazed everyone who met him. The transformation in both their lives had been nothing short of miraculous. Alpha King Maximilian had kept his word about eternal gratitude, but what he had offered her went far beyond mere thanks. He had given her something she had never dared dream of: a family, a purpose, and a place where her gentle heart was seen as a strength rather than a weakness. Lady Elara. A familiar voice called from behind her. She turned to see Commander Thane approaching, though his demeanor toward her had changed dramatically from that first terrifying encounter, where once there had been suspicion and barely contained violence. Now there was deep respect and something that looked remarkably like paternal affection. His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room. There are matters of great importance to discuss. Over the past months, Elara had learned that when the Alpha King requested her presence for matters of importance, it usually meant something wonderful was about to happen. He had already granted her a title, lands of her own, and a position as Prince Adrian's official guardian and companion. What more could there possibly be? As they walked through corridors lined with tapestries that told the history of the Northern realm, Elara reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. No longer was she the invisible Omega who existed on the margins of pack society. Here, she was cherished, valued, and most importantly, loved, not just by the king and prince, but by every member of the royal court who had witnessed her unwavering devotion to their beloved heir. The throne room was magnificent even by royal standards, its soaring ceilings supported by pillars of white marble veined with gold. Stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor, depicting scenes from the realm's glorious history. The massive throne itself seemed to be carved from a single piece of midnight black stone that pulsed with its own inner light, a symbol of power that had endured for over 1,000 years. But it wasn't the room's grandeur that took Elara's breath away. It was the sight of Alpha King Maximilian holding his son. The two of them bathed in afternoon sunlight that made Prince Adrian's silver eyes shine like captured stars. The love between father and son was so pure, so profound, that it filled the enormous space with warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. Elara, the king said, his voice carrying the warmth she had come to associate with their private conversations. Gone was the terrible figure of supernatural authority she had first encountered. In his place was a devoted father whose gratitude knew no bounds. Come, there is something I wish to show you. Prince Adrian squeaked with delight when he saw her approaching, reaching his tiny paws in her direction with the enthusiasm that never failed to melt her heart. The bond between them had only grown stronger over the months, a connection forged in suffering and sealed with unconditional love. She was the first face he had learned to trust, the gentle voice that had sung him through his darkest hours, and he clearly considered her as much family as his father. "Hello, my little warrior," she whispered, accepting him into her arms where he immediately settled with a contented sigh that spoke of absolute trust and security. "Have you been good for your papa today?" The king's smile at this interaction could have powered the entire stronghold. "He's been perfect, as always, but..." Then he learned from the best teacher about compassion and strength. His expression grew serious, though his eyes remained warm with affection. "Elara, these past months have shown me something I should have realized long ago. Strength isn't just about power or dominance or the ability to command through fear." She tilted her head, uncertain where this was leading, but touched by the profound respect in his voice. "You saved my son not because you had to, but because your heart wouldn't allow you to do otherwise," he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "In doing so, you saved not just Adrian, but our entire kingdom. Without an heir, the northern realm would have descended into chaos and war. Thousands would have died fighting for the throne." From somewhere in the shadows behind the throne, figures began to emerge. Elara gasped as she recognized them, nobles from across the supernatural world, representatives from dozens of packs, and at their head, a figure that made her heart nearly stop with shock. Her old pack leader from the Silver Moon pack stood there, but his expression was nothing like the cruel disdain she remembered. Instead, his eyes held shame, regret, and something that looked remarkably like hope for redemption. When word spread of the Omega who had saved the Crown Prince, the king explained, "It reached every corner of our world, including those who had failed to see your worth when it was right before their eyes." The Silver Moon Alpha stepped forward, his head bowed in genuine submission. "Lady Elara," he said, and the title fell from his lips with sincere respect that would have been unimaginable months ago. "I come to beg your forgiveness for the blindness that led us to treat you as less than you were. We were fools who couldn't recognize the treasure in our midst." Tears filled Elara's eyes, but they weren't tears of pain this time. They were tears of a healing she hadn't even realized she needed. "There's nothing to forgive," she said softly, her voice carrying the wisdom that suffering had taught her. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them and choosing to be better." The Alpha King nodded approvingly at her response, then gestured to a small table that had been placed beside his throne. Upon it rested a circlet of silver, so delicate it looked like captured moonlight, set with gems that seemed to hold tiny stars within their crystalline depths. "Elara," he said, his voice taking on the formal tones of ancient ceremony, "you have proven beyond any doubt that nobility isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose to embody through your actions, your compassion, and your unwavering moral courage." She stared at the circlet, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The craftsmanship was beyond anything she had ever imagined, each detail perfect and meaningful. "This is the crown of the Guardian," the king continued, lifting the circlet with reverent hands, "worn by those chosen to protect and guide the royal heirs. It hasn't been bestowed in over 3 centuries, not since my great-grandmother found someone worthy of such honor." The assembled nobles began to kneel, one by one, until everyone in the throne room, except the king himself, was bowing to her. Even Commander Thane had dropped to one knee, his scarred face showing nothing but respect and admiration. With infinite ceremony, he placed the circlet upon her brow. The moment the silver touched her skin, Elara felt complete, whole, exactly where she belonged. Prince Adrian gurgled happily in her arms, reaching up to touch the circlet with tiny fingers, his silver eyes seeming to approve. "Rise, Guardian Elara," the Alpha King commanded. "Your compassion has become our strength, your love our guiding light. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey." Subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales that celebrate the strength found in kindness. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that even the smallest acts of love can change the world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures.